The night had no mercy left in it. Snow fell without pause, thick and heavy, covering the road until it disappeared. The wind screamed across the open land like it was angry at the world. Every step she took felt harder than the last, as if the ground itself wanted her to lie down and never move again. Her name did not matter out here. Her past did not matter either. The cold treated everyone the same. She pulled her coat tighter, but it did little good. The fabric was old, worn thin by years of use and regret. Her fingers burned, then slowly went numb. She could no longer feel her toes, and that frightened her more than the darkness. When feeling leaves, life often follows. She had been walking for hours, maybe longer. Time felt strange when pain filled every thought. She did not know where she was going, only that she could not go back. The town behind her held too many memories that cut deeper than the wind. People there remembered her mistakes clearly, but never the reasons behind them. She had tried to be strong, she really had. But strength was heavy when carried alone. Her breath came out in sharp clouds, each one weaker than the last. The world around her was nothing but white ground and black sky. No lights, no houses, no voices calling her name. That should have told her something. Her legs began to shake. At first she ignored it, then one knee buckled. She caught herself, hands sinking into the snow. The cold bit into her skin like teeth. Just rest, her tired mind whispered. Just for a moment. She knew better. Rest meant never getting up again. She forced herself back onto her feet, but only managed a few more steps before her body betrayed her. This time she fell hard, breath knocked from her chest. The snow felt soft, almost kind, and that scared her most of all. She stared up at the dark sky. Snowflakes landed on her eyelashes, melting into warm drops that felt like tears she no longer had the strength to cry. "I'm sorry," she whispered. She was not sure who she was apologizing to, maybe to herself, maybe to the person she once hoped to be. The cold pressed in closer, wrapping around her like a quiet promise. Her thoughts slowed. The pain dulled. That strange calm came, the one people never talk about, the moment when giving up feels easy. That was when she heard it. A sound that did not belong to the storm. Hooves. Slow, steady, real. Her eyes struggled to focus as a dark shape moved through the falling snow. At first she thought it was another trick of her fatting mind, but the shape grew clearer. A horse, and on it a man. He rode like the wind did not bother him, like the cold knew better than to try. He pulled the reins and the horse stopped just a few steps away from her. The man swung down, boots hitting the ground with a solid sound that felt powerful in the silent night. He knelt beside her without hesitation. "Hey," he said, voice low but firm, "stay with me." She tried to answer, but her lips barely moved. Her vision blurred, then sharpened as his gloved hands brushed snow from her face. His eyes were calm, focused, and very human. "You shouldn't be out here," she whispered, each word cracking. He shook his head slightly. "Neither should you, but here we are." He wrapped her in a thick blanket, lifting her carefully as if she were something precious instead of broken. She felt warmth for the first time in hours, and it shocked her enough to make her gasp. The man held her close, shielding her from the wind as he carried her to the horse. The animal stood patiently, steam rising from its body like it was made of strength and breath. She wanted to tell him to leave her, that she was not worth the trouble, that the cold had already started to win. But the cowboy did not ask permission. As he mounted the horse and settled her safely in front of him, he spoke softly near her ear. "The cold doesn't get to choose tonight," he said. "I do." And as the horse turned away from the endless white, she felt something she thought she had lost forever. Hope small, shaking, but alive. The ride through the storm felt unreal. She leaned against the cowboy's chest, barely aware of the horse moving beneath them. The wind still howled, but it felt farther away now, like it belonged to another world. His arm stayed tight around her, steady and unshaking, as if he feared she might disappear if he loosened his hold. Her thoughts drifted in and out. Sometimes she felt the cold creeping back. Sometimes she felt warmth spreading slowly, painfully through her frozen body. Every time she slipped too far, his voice pulled her back. "Stay awake," he said gently. "You're doing good." No one had told her that in a long time. At last, a small cabin appeared through the snow, half hidden by tall trees bent from years of harsh winters. The cowboy guided the horse toward it and dismounted quickly. He lifted her down with care, like she was fragile glass instead of a woman who had been running from her life. Inside the cabin, firelight flickered across wooden walls. The heat hit her all at once, sharp and overwhelming. She gasped, clutching his coat. "It's all right," he said. "Easy now." He laid her near the fire and knelt beside her, removing her boots with slow, careful movements. Her feet were pale and cold, and she felt ashamed for him to see her like this, dirty, shaking, and close to breaking. But he showed no disgust, only concern. He wrapped her feet in dry cloth, then added another blanket over her shoulders. The cabin smelled of burning wood and coffee grounds. It smelled like safety. Her teeth chattered violently. He placed a cup of warm water near her lips. "Small sips," he said. "Don't rush it." She obeyed, even though every part of her wanted to gulp it down. The warmth slid into her chest, and for the first time she felt like she might survive the night. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once, as if helping someone out of the cold was nothing special. "Name, Ethan," he said. "You don't have to tell me yours yet." That simple kindness, no questions, no pressure, made her eyes sting. She turned her face toward the fire, afraid he would see her cry. As the worst of the shaking passed, exhaustion settled deep into her bones. Her body felt heavy, like it had finally accepted rest after fighting too long. But her mind would not rest. Images from her past came rushing back. Angry voices, closed doors, mistakes she could not undo. She squeezed her eyes shut, breathing unevenly. Ethan noticed. He sat across from her, giving her space, but staying close enough that she did not feel alone. "You're safe here," he said quietly. "Whatever chased you out there won't cross my door tonight." She wanted to believe him. She really did. Sleep came in broken pieces. She drifted off, then woke again, startled by the crackle of fire or the sound of the wind against the walls. Each time she saw Ethan still there, adding wood to the fire, cleaning a small cut on her hand, or simply watching the storm outside with calm patience. At one point she woke suddenly, heart racing. "Don't leave," she said without thinking. Ethan looked at her, surprised, then softened. "I'm not going anywhere," he replied. Those words settled something deep inside her. By morning, the storm had eased. Pale light slipped through the small window, touching the cabin walls like a quiet blessing. She woke feeling sore but alive, truly alive. Ethan stood by the stove, pouring coffee. He glanced over his shoulder. "Morning," he said. "Cold tried to take you, but it failed." She pushed herself up slowly, blankets sliding from her shoulders. For the first time in a long while, she felt something close to warmth, not just on her skin, but inside her chest. She looked at the man who had pulled her from the snow and realized something important. The cold had almost broken her body, but it had not broken her spirit. Not yet. Morning light crept slowly into the cabin, pale and quiet. The fire crackled low, filling the room with warmth that made the chill of the storm feel like a distant memory. She sat wrapped in blankets, staring at the wooden floor, unsure if she belonged in this safe place. Outside, the world was still white, but inside, for the first time, she felt a fragile thread of hope. Ethan moved around the cabin with quiet certainty. He prepared breakfast, tending to small tasks as if he had done this 100 times, yet nothing about him felt ordinary. There was a steadiness in his presence, a strength without force, and she found herself studying him in silence. She had spent so long avoiding people, avoiding trust, but something about him made fear feel optional. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a truck engine grinding through the snow. Her heart seized. Instinctively, she froze. The sound grew louder. Voices followed, harsh, angry, and full of accusation. Her past had found her again. "They know where I am," she whispered, voice trembling. Her fingers clutched the blanket tighter. Ethan turned toward her, calm but alert. "They're not welcome here," he said simply. "They'll hurt you if you—" She started, but he interrupted gently. "Not if I stand with you," he said. The truck stopped outside, and she could hear footsteps crunching in the snow. The voices called her name, mocking, demanding, familiar in the way only old mistakes could be. She felt panic rise in her chest, the old fear she had carried for years, the fear of being trapped, judged, and powerless. Ethan moved to the door and opened it slowly. She stepped back instinctively, wanting to vanish. But he didn't step forward aggressively. He didn't shout or threaten. He simply stood, shoulders squared, letting the men see that this cabin and the person inside was protected. "She's under my roof," he said, his voice carried across the snow. You leave now or I'll call you out." The men laughed, sharp and cruel, thinking his words were empty. But the calm certainty in his tone was stronger than any fear they carried. Something about him made them hesitate. The snow crunched under their boots, but the laughter faltered. She felt a strange sense of awe. For the first time, someone was standing up for her not out of duty, but out of choice. He didn't owe her anything, and yet he refused to look away. Finally, the men left, muttering threats and confusion. The truck disappeared down the snow-covered road, and silence returned. She slumped against the cabin wall, shaking with adrenaline and relief. Ethan returned to her side, closing the door and checking the latch. "Safe," he said simply. "For now, tomorrow can wait." She wanted to thank him, but no words came. Instead, she simply stared at him, realizing the weight of what had just happened. Someone had chosen to protect her, not out of obligation, but because they saw value in her life even when she could not see it herself. Her chest felt lighter, though the fear still lingered like a shadow at the edges. She realized that she had been carrying her past alone for too long. Every mistake, every scar, every regret had felt like a weight she had to bear in silence. But now, someone had shared that burden without demanding repayment. That night, as the storm finally faded into a quiet hush, she lay by the fire wrapped in blankets. Her mind raced, trying to process the sudden shift of reality. The world outside was still cold and unforgiving, but inside the cabin she had seen a glimpse of something she hadn't felt in years. Protection without judgment, warmth without strings. Ethan moved quietly around the cabin, tending the fire and preparing for the night. She watched him in silence, her heart full of emotions she couldn't name. For the first time, she felt something fragile and dangerous: trust. And deep down, she knew the moment had changed her. She had faced the ghosts of her past and survived, not alone. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the cold wouldn't break her after all. The days that followed were quiet, but not empty. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside soft and pale, with patches of snow melting into mud and grass. Inside the cabin, life began to take a slower, steadier rhythm. She moved carefully, helping with small chores, sweeping the floor, stacking firewood, filling the water pail. Every movement reminded her that her hands could still do more than tremble in fear. Ethan never forced her to do anything. He taught with quiet patience, showing her how to care for the horses, how to light the stove safely, how to mend broken things. When she failed, and she failed often, he never scolded or sighed. He just showed her again, letting her try until her hands found their own rhythm. At first, she resented it. Pride and shame wrestled inside her. She had been running from her past for so long that she forgot how to move forward. Trust felt foreign, like a word written in a language she no longer knew. But the more she worked, the more she noticed small changes. Her body felt stronger. Her mind felt clearer. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the fear in her chest loosened its grip. One evening, as the sun sank behind the snow-streaked trees, she sat by the fire, trembling as emotions she had buried rose to the surface. Memories of mistakes, betrayals, and regrets filled her mind. She spoke aloud, though no one pressed her to. She told Ethan about the people she had hurt, the choices she wished she could undo, the nights she had cried alone. Ethan listened. He didn't interrupt or judge. He just added another log to the fire, letting the warmth seep into the room and into her chest. His silence felt like an embrace, steady and unwavering, letting her know that her story didn't have to scare him away. She realized something she hadn't dared to feel in years. Someone could see her broken pieces and still choose to stay. It terrified her. It also gave her a strange strength. She began to believe that her past did not have to define her, that the cold that had once tried to steal her life and spirit could no longer claim her entirely. The days stretched into weeks. She learned to laugh quietly at herself when she tripped over a horse's hooves or spilled a bucket of water. She learned to rise early with the sun, feeling the chill on her skin but knowing warmth waited inside the cabin. She learned that survival wasn't just about escaping danger. It was about finding a reason to stay alive, to fight quietly for herself. Ethan rarely spoke of the past. He only reminded her that pain was not shame and that mistakes did not erase value. Slowly, she began to understand that the warmth she felt near him was not just from the fire. It was from the fact that someone had chosen to see her as human, not a shadow of her past. One night, after a long day of work and silence, she finally asked him why he had stopped for her in the storm. His expression softened, eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "The cold can take bodies," he said. It can freeze hands, toes, hearts, but it doesn't get to take hope if I refuse to let it. You just needed someone who wouldn't look away. She wanted to argue, wanted to say that he had done too much. But instead, she nodded, letting the words sink in. For the first time in years, she felt the walls around her heart crack, not in fear, but in relief. She felt alive, more alive than she had since the cold first tried to claim her. The fire crackled beside them as the night deepened. Outside, snow might fall again, storms might return. But inside the cabin, she had learned something stronger than fear. That kindness could be a shield, trust could be a weapon, and human connection could heal a soul that had almost frozen entirely. For the first time, she dared to hope that she might not just survive, but live. The cold had been gone for days, replaced by a fragile spring thaw. The sun reflected off melting snow, creating a world that felt soft, almost fragile, like it could break under the weight of a single misstep. She walked outside the cabin, feeling the earth under her boots, each step reminding her she was still alive. The warmth that had begun inside her chest was growing stronger, spreading slowly into her bones. But life had a way of testing courage. A familiar sound shattered the quiet, a truck engine heavy and harsh against the soft morning. Her stomach clenched. Her past had caught up again. The men who had chased her before were back, and this time their voices carried anger and threats like sharpened blades. She froze, fear surged, as strong as it had ever been. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to hide, to vanish into the woods and pretend she didn't exist. But something inside hesitated, something new and fragile, the small, stubborn ember of strength that had begun to grow since Ethan had found her in the storm. "They'll take me again," she whispered, voice trembling. "You won't let them," Ethan said. His voice was calm, but the certainty in it was unshakable. He moved to the door, letting the world outside see that this cabin and the woman inside was protected. She wanted to argue, "It's my mess, let me." "You've been running for too long," he interrupted softly. "Stand with me or fall alone, your choice." Her heart pounded, every instinct begged her to flee, every shadow of her past whispered that she wasn't strong enough. And yet she felt something shift inside, a strange, terrifying courage. Maybe it wasn't about strength. Maybe it was about claiming herself even when the world demanded she kneel. The men arrived at the porch, voices sharp with accusation. They expected fear. They expected submission. But she did not step back. Instead, she stepped forward, her body trembling but her gaze steady. "I am not yours," she said, voice breaking slightly but clear. "I am done running." Ethan stood beside her, but not in front. Not as a shield, beside her as an equal. His presence bolstered her, but the words were hers. Her declaration, her courage, her choice. The men hesitated. The laughter that had once been cruel faltered. There was no gun drawn, no threat needed. Just a woman standing tall in the light, refusing to cower, refusing to be claimed by fear. And then slowly they left, confused, empty-handed, shaken by something they could not name. She sank against the cabin wall once the threat had passed, shaking with adrenaline and relief. Her body felt heavy, but her heart felt light in a way it had not in years. Ethan came to her side, draping a blanket over her shoulders. "You didn't need saving," he said quietly, eyes steady on hers. "You just needed a chance." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to tell him he was wrong. But the truth lingered in her chest, warming her like the fire inside the cabin. That night she sat by the hearth, staring into the flames. For the first time she understood something vital. Courage was not the absence of fear, it was standing up despite it. It was facing the storm, even when your legs shook and your heart screamed to run. And in that small cabin, she learned that she could choose herself. She could face her past, her fears, and the men who thought they controlled her. She could refuse to be broken. The cold had chased her, threatened her, and tried to claim her spirit. But for the first time, she saw that strength lived inside her, and sometimes the choice to stand could change everything. For the first time in her life, she felt the weight of the world shift, not because she was alone, but because someone had stood beside her while she discovered the power of her own courage. Spring crept slowly over the land, softening the sharp edges of winter. Snow turned to mud and puddles, and the smell of wet earth filled the air. Birds returned, cautious at first, chirping like the world was waking from a long, cold dream. Inside the cabin, life began to feel less like survival and more like living. She woke each morning to warmth, to sunlight slipping across wooden floors, and to the quiet rhythm of a life that no longer ran from fear. She moved with confidence now, carrying water, tending the small garden Ethan had started behind the cabin, brushing the horses' coats until they shined. Her hands, once trembling and frostbitten, now worked steadily. Each task reminded her that her body could be trusted again, that her strength had not left her, even when the storm and fear had tried to claim it. Ethan worked beside her, quiet but present, never forcing, never judging. He showed her the small lessons of daily life, how to feed the horses, how to mend torn blankets, how to see beauty in the simplest things. And each time she learned, he would nod with quiet approval, a small smile tugging at his lips. She realized slowly that she was not just surviving. She was becoming someone she had almost forgotten she could be. One morning after feeding the horses, she paused in the yard. Mud clung to her boots, her hair was wild from the wind, and yet she felt alive. Ethan approached, his boots soft on the wet ground. "You've changed," he said simply. "I feel different," she admitted, looking at the muddy tracks behind her. "I feel lighter." He didn't ask for explanations, didn't pry. He just nodded, letting her words stand. And in that silence, she realized something profound. She could exist without fear defining every step. She could laugh again, even quietly. She could wake to mornings not dreading what would happen next. Days passed into weeks. Each one brought small victories, a horse that trusted her touch, a fire that burned without smoke, a meal that turned out right. Each moment felt like proof that life could be gentle, that strength could be quiet, that survival could grow into more than just existing. One evening, as the sun sank low, painting the sky in gold and pink, she sat by the fire, hands wrapped around a warm cup. Ethan moved across the room, adding another log. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and hope. She dared to speak aloud the thought that had been growing in her chest. "Why did you stop for me in the storm?" she asked. Ethan paused, then sat across from her. "The cold can take hands, toes, even hearts," he said. "But it doesn't get to take hope if someone refuses to look away. You just needed someone who wouldn't leave you behind." She felt tears sting her eyes, but this time they weren't from despair. They were from relief. She had been so accustomed to being alone, to being afraid that no one would care enough to stay. And yet, here he was. Not judging, not demanding, simply standing with her while she remembered how to live. She realized then that warmth was not just the fire or the blankets. Warmth was in choice. The choice to protect, to trust, to stay, to help someone believe in themselves again. She had received that warmth, and now it lingered inside her, growing steadily, spreading to places she had thought frozen forever. The sun disappeared behind the horizon, leaving the cabin in the gentle glow of firelight. She watched the flames dance, thinking of the long journey she had endured, the cold that had tried to take her, the fear that had gripped her, the past that had hunted her. And yet she was still here. Because someone had refused to look away. Because she had allowed herself to stand, to trust, to learn. Because warmth, once given, had the power to stay. And in that quiet cabin, as the world outside softened into night, she understood something she had never dared to believe. She could survive, she could heal, and she could live, not just exist. Because humanity had chosen not to let her go. Years had passed since the snowstorm that had almost claimed her. The world outside the cabin had changed, and so had she. Spring returned every year, gentle and patient, reminding her that life moved forward, even after the harshest winters. The land around the cabin had grown green and fertile, the horses healthy and strong, and the small garden behind the house now blossomed with flowers she had planted herself. Every corner of the home carried a sense of calm and purpose, a life she had built piece by piece. She stood on the porch, sunlight warming her face, and watched travelers passing by. Some stopped for water, some for directions, others merely to rest. She greeted each one with a quiet smile, her voice soft but steady. She had learned the power of small kindnesses, the way a warm word or a shared meal could ripple through someone's life. She had learned that being human was not about being perfect. It was about choosing to help, to protect, to believe in someone else when the world had already stopped believing. Ethan stood beside her, leaning on the porch railing, watching her with the same quiet attention he had always had. There was no need for words. She felt the presence beside her like a steady heartbeat, a reminder that some connections did not fade with time. Together, they had created a home, a safe place where fear could not reach, where hope was nurtured, and where courage grew quietly with every passing day. She thought back to the night of the storm, to the bitter cold that had nearly frozen her spirit. She remembered how hopeless she had felt, how alone. And she remembered him, Ethan, a man who had chosen not to look away, who had carried her through fear, through snow, through pain. It was a memory that brought both tears and smiles, the kind of memory that could never fade because it had changed the course of her life. Now when she looked at the horizon, she saw not a world to run from, but a world to embrace. The wind no longer frightened her. The cold no longer held power over her spirit. Every step she took on the earth was her own, deliberate and strong. She had faced the men of her past, the shadows of her mistakes, the biting cold of both nature and fear, and she had survived, not because she was fearless, but because she had chosen to stand. And there was more than survival. There was growth, laughter, hope, and warmth that lingered in her chest like the fire that had once saved her life. She could care for others, forgive herself, and believe that humanity was more than just cruelty, more than mistakes, more than cold winters. It was resilience, compassion, and the quiet, stubborn choice to protect one another. Ethan's hand brushed hers as they watched the sunset together. She turned to him, gratitude and respect shining in her eyes. "You saved me," she said softly. He shook his head, a gentle smile on his lips. "No," he replied. "You saved yourself, I just helped you remember how to stand." And in that truth, she understood the essence of humanity. Not just the grand gestures, but the quiet choices, the steadfast refusal to abandon someone in their darkness, the patience to walk beside them until they could find their own strength. The cabin glowed behind them, warm and welcoming. The world stretched wide in front of them, full of possibility. She breathed deeply, feeling the wind on her face, the sun on her shoulders, and the life that had once seemed impossible now entirely within her grasp. She had learned to survive, she had learned to trust, she had learned to hope. And she knew with the deepest certainty that even in a world that could be cruel and cold, humanity, stubborn, kind, and relentless, could shine brightly enough to save a soul. The cold had come, but it had not won. Humanity had,